I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm approaching doing this particular video with a degree of trepidation, fearing that I won't be able to do justice to something that I love. Uh, it's like you visit Yosemite and you write to somebody and you say, "Boy, it's such a spectacular place. It's so beautiful," and then you run into what John Muir wrote about Yosemite. And you think, well, he managed to convey in words something that connects you with, that it's sort of electric experience he had of nature in that place. Well, anyway, I do love movies. Um, saying that doesn't contradict what I'm going to say next, which is most movies I wouldn't spend time watching. What proportion I consider worth watching, but it's definitely a minority. But so many movies have been made over such a long period of time by now that the number of movies that I find rewarding to watch to a greater or lesser degree is really quite extensive. I'm lucky that I've come to enjoy watching something more than once, which I didn't used to entertain the idea of doing. But now I find it really kind of rich and rewarding, almost like it's a holiday to go through that particular thing. Even though I don't do it super often with different movies. I need to give more years between times, but I wouldn't watch. I've watched each of the three movies I'm going to talk about, all in the last couple months, maybe even 5 weeks. But I wouldn't watch any of them again uh, for a while. But I find, and it's not because at my age I don't remember. I do remember. I know what's coming. Oftentimes, anyway. Some things I don't. Sometimes I'm surprised that I don't remember more, and sometimes I'm surprised that I remember exactly what's going to happen. It's not the element of surprise. It's going into that world. It's like listening to a piece of music. I mean, it's interesting to me, and I never understood it when I was thinking about these things as a teenager and then in college. When it came to movies, I was only a one-time person. And then music was almost the opposite. I mean, you could listen to something so often that it lost its ability to nourish. Or at least that's how I experienced it. But oftentimes, if I heard something for the first time, that could be something. But then the second time, I would get more, and it seems as though the music that is most moving was music with which I had familiarity, and I think I'm probably typical about that. People like to listen to the same things again and again, old favorites, standards, and stuff like that. I'm developing a stable of movies that are kind of that way. Uh, but again, and I also don't listen to the same song again and again. There are songs that I really like, and I put them on my Spotify playlist, and I'm happy when they show up. But if they show up too often, I try to avoid it for a while. Anyway, I love these movies, and I don't know that I feel competent to bring them to life in a way that justifies my asking you to listen to me about them. But I'll do what I can. So, starting in my early 20s, maybe about the age of 20, and for a long time thereafter, let's see, into my 40s, I guess, my favorite film was Wild Strawberries. It's a film by the Swedish director Ingmar Bergman, and I think it's a magnificent piece of work. Um, it's a story. It's not because I'm an old man that I'm talking about. It's about an old man, but it became my favorite when I was in my early 20s. It's a story of an old man who has occasion to review his life. It's a life in which it's a very mixed picture, his life. And he is approaching death as I mean, he knows he's dreaming dreams, which tell him that his time is about up. And in fact, the actor who so brilliantly portrays this old man did die the following year. Um, I think he died at about the age that I am now. But he does a marvelous job, and he's this guy who's very accomplished. And in fact, he's on his way to be honored for the life that he's led and for his achievements as a medical doctor and as a professor, and this is in Sweden. And but he's also a person who, how to put it, he mismanaged because of his uptightness, his limitations, and his inability to deal well with the emotional and relationship and sexual side of life, had a whole personal world that was impoverished and disappointing and painful in some ways, and painful in ways that he also inflicted on the people closest to him. And so this is all takes place in the course of a single day, from his waking up from a dream to his, at the end, falling asleep and having a dream. It's just magnificent the way it unfolds. It has all these different vignettes. It's very much like life itself, that things happen, and then he moves to here, and at each scene, Bergman is effortlessly showing us something that puts this whole dilemma of coming to terms, an old man coming to terms with life, in which he has succeeded in some ways and failed in others. And it's very nourishing and healing what happens to him in the course of the day. He ends up in a place that he hadn't been before. And I'm a sucker for, I feel moved just thinking about it. I'm a sucker for redemption stories. It's really one of the most beautiful potentialities in the human world, or in human lives, that imperfect creatures that we are, we can go through some things and end up more whole. There's in Erik Erikson's psychology. I studied with Erikson when I was in college. Famous stages of life, and the last one is integrity versus despair. And I see this as a very affirmative working through of a human being with their strengths and weaknesses, and coming to terms with the life that they'd led, and becoming a person from whom good things go out into the world, which we also see that by the end, he's doing things which make the world more whole, that are good for the hearts of the people that he'd hurt in his pre-redemption state. I don't want to tell you anymore, but there are dreams, there are characters, there is an element of female beauty and eroticism that is a part of life that he never achieved, but we taste what it was that he missed. There's one beautiful woman played by Bibi Andersson, I think is the name of the actress. She's the woman that, had he been better put together, would have been his wife. And she was filled with, I don't know, the erotic potential, I think, is what gets conveyed. And then that is something we see in flashback. And so we get a sense of the place where he lost out on life, and feels a lot of pain, and pain that he wasn't able to deal with very well. and he's shut down a lot. And then there's a hitchhiker, a young woman with accompanied by two young men, and she's played by the same actress, and she's still beautiful, but she looks very different. She's very much more modern, not the post-Victorian Swedish scene of his youth, but a young, like college students on a spring break kind of a feeling with these people. And she and the older man have developed this relationship, which is good for his heart and good for the young woman, and is part of what opens him up. I love that movie. And speaking of redemption, the second movie is in fact a story of redemption of a very different sort, and starting in the early 1990s, not long after the movie came out. It replaced Wild Strawberries as my favorite movie, and I've been walking around. I think up until I saw Wild Strawberries again, just last month. Um, I've just, what's my favorite movie? I mean, I've always wanted to have an answer to that question. If I had to put several, I was okay, I guess. But I always had one favorite movie, almost always, and Groundhog Day replaced Wild Strawberries as now it's my favorite movie. I think that Wild Strawberries lost a little bit of radiance for me too. It wasn't just being replaced. It's lost ground for a while. I don't know why. It regained that ground when I saw it off my DVR over the course of several nights, a bunch of nights, because that's how I watch movies. Groundhog Day, I think, is also a masterpiece. There's such a clever idea right at the heart of it, which is that every morning he's going to wake up and there's no tomorrow. It's the same day again and again and again. And people have discussed how many times was it that he woke up in Puxatawny, Pennsylvania, and it's Groundhog Day, and he's everybody else in the world is just doing what they're doing. They don't know this is the second time around, but he's compelled to live the same day again and again. It's so clever and so funny, and Bill Murray. It's a perfect part for Bill Murray, which an important part of it is that he's so good at being such a complete jerk. He starts out as a complete egotistical, phony jerk that goes around putting everybody down, acting superior, doing nothing for anybody else, feeding his own narcissism, not being a genuine person that comes from the heart and tells what he's really feeling, but continually in this posture of a jerk. That's who he is when we meet him. That's who he is the first Groundhog Day, where he and Andy McDowell, who is the producer, and a beautiful young woman, is part of the three-person team that the station in Pittsburgh is sent down to Puxatawny to cover this event. And he covers it, and then he wakes up the next morning, and it's the same day, and he has to cover it again. And this goes on, some people I think like 10,000 times. But here's what happens that, as I see it, in terms of a story of redemption. And it happens in a way that shows that ideas are at the heart of this movie, yet it is not dealt with in any kind of intellectual way. It's shown what's true. And what's true is, first of all, he's a jerk. Secondly, that being a jerk doesn't get him what he wants. Acting cruelly, contemptuously, unkindly, unconstructively, unsupportively, doesn't get him what he wants. And also manipulatively, because that's the route that he, as a jerk, takes about how to. He soon, first he's disturbed, then he figures out, hey, I've got some advantages here. I know what's going to happen. I can plan. And he goes about getting information from people that he's able to exploit. And what he wants ultimately is he wants Andy McDowell. And he does. We go through a whole sequence of ways in which he makes use of the fact that he has these repetitive days to refine his attempts to manipulate her into loving him and going to bed with him or whatever the deal is. It's not spelled out exactly what he's looking for, but it doesn't work. Being a jerk and being manipulative will not get him what he feels he wants to be fulfilled. And he has to go through that so many times that he ends up hitting bottom. He tries to kill himself again and again and again. That's very funny. It's lots of ways in which he goes about it. And the film is always funny and it's always clever, and that's why it's a masterpiece. But this is the thing that it's built on. He's got to die to be reborn. He finds out that that will not, I mean, he kills himself again and again, but the next morning at 6 in the morning, the clock flips and then you hear Sonny and Cher singing, I Got You, Babe. And it all starts up again. He can't get out of it. The only way he can get out of it, we eventually see how he gets out of it. He hits bottom, and then he begins to move away from being a jerk. The humility that comes with seeing his limitations, being forced to see his limitations. He's not going to get what he wants that way. If he wants love, he's going to have to be a different kind of human being. And then we watch how he develops him to a different kind of human being. Again, he's still doing the same day. It's not like as soon as he turns the corner, the universe lets him go forward. No, he's got to study what it is to be a decent human being and to be a human being who's worthy of the love of the woman that he has such a high appreciation of. He eventually says to her, you're not in a Manchurian Candidate kind of way. Speaking of movies. So we eventually culminate. And when he has arrived at a place of redemption, he has become a person, not the one that we saw at the beginning, way more than much bigger. These are not subtle changes in Bill Murray's character, like in Wild Strawberries. That was a realistic, like a day of opening the heart and being. But this is, a real transformation by a cosmos that wasn't going to let him go until he learned the lesson he had to learn to be spiritually redeemed, and becomes the person who Andy McDowell does fall in love with for good reasons. Not because he's manipulated her, but because he's been such an admirable human being. Why not love him? And he's been so good to her. Why not love him? And then comes the final morning where the clock flips to 6 in the morning, and it's the next day. And she's there in bed with him. Nothing apparently happened the night before. They go out of their way a little bit to tell us that. But they are then walking out into the world together as a couple. It is a comedy in that respect. The comedy ends with a marriage. I mean, there isn't any ceremony here, but the woman and who started out fully aware of what a jerk Phil Connors is the name of our character was, and repelled by his disgusting, condescending, scornful ways. She started out the day that way, as far as she knows. And 10,000 tries later, he's a different person. And they go through that day together in a way that leads to her letting go of all that. She doesn't seem to have any struggle about forgetting what she thought about him 12 hours before. And that, yeah, I don't think it would work that way, but I'm willing to go along for the ride. I think it's a masterpiece. Then, since I saw both of those movies recently that rekindled my enthusiasm for them, I've seen another movie that I'm, for the first time, starting just yesterday, I guess it was, I mentioned, I think maybe I've got three favorite movies now, I said to my wife. And this third movie is the oldest of the three. Uh, Wild Strawberries was a Swedish film that was made in the late 50s by Ingmar Bergman. Uh, while, Groundhog Day was early 90s. A guy named Ramis, I guess, was the director. Uh, but this movie is made by a famous duo, Powell and they were a British team of movie makers that made several movies during the war that are kind of wonderful. TCM did a whole thing about these guys, and I can't say that I have nearly as much enthusiasm for the work they did after the war. But in 1945, they released a movie called I Know Where I'm Going, or She Knows Where I'm Going, where she's going. I should know the name of it. 1945. Uh, the she in this title is played by a woman named Wendy Hiller, who's got a presence I find kind of electric and magnetic in this role, in this situation. She's a person who's, first of all, this is a romance, and I am a sucker for a romance. Redemption stories and romances are things I'm a sucker for. I'm a guy who has trouble dealing with the fact that the world is as broken as it is. I love things to be just right and beautiful, and uh, people moving into greater wholeness and healing of the soul and heart. That's one kind of good. And then two people, the right people coming together. Well, I'm strictly hetero in my relationship to romance, and for a man and a woman, this happens in so many stories, to find a way to come together in something that we believe in, that this is going to be good. There is going to be happiness here. Uh, I would mention a couple of, like Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, those two, Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail. Those are two that I really like, where we get to at the end. This case, what we've got is there's a young English woman who's very determined, very ambitious, who's going to be marrying this hugely rich guy who's a magnate, I guess, of the British industrial economy, and extremely rich. And he doesn't own this island, it turns out, but he's renting the whole island for indefinitely. And our young lady, who's not rich, is going to marry this guy who is really, really rich, who's got the lease on this whole island. And then the weather prevents her getting out to that island where the wedding's supposed to be held. But there's another character. Well, in a sense, there are two characters. One character is that she gets stuck because of the weather, that she can't get to the island for the wedding on the day it was supposed to be. She's in this culture of Scotland that is a town, and I don't have a clear picture of the whole world, but it's a town that's sort of close to the earth, and it's elemental, and it's got a goodness about it, and it's got a wholesomeness about it, and it's so grounded. And the characters are people who train falconer. He's a one guy is a falconer, and then there are these interlopers that are sort of British money that occupy a piece of the land up there in the Scotland. And she gets to see, in some senses, because she's stuck there, um, two different cultures, the one that she's about to marry into, and this other one that's got so much spirit in it and so much beauty. It's almost like in the Star Wars when we get to to the place where in the forest where the Ewoks live after all that plastic on the Death Star and all that. This is where life is. Well, I've got that same feeling about the way they depict the Scots. There's a whole episode of Scottish singing and dancing that's performed by some major musical group out of Edinburgh, I guess, in making this movie. And you just feel that this is more what life is about. We hear her fiance say on the radio, "Oh, you got to visit the so and so's who are renting this big castle where she is, on that side of the water. Uh, they're the only people who are worth knowing over there." Meanwhile, hearing this and being with her is our hero, which I maybe prolong too long. The representative of this society is a guy who's not rough-hewn, but is a real mensch, to use an expression which isn't Scottish. I mean, there's something about him which makes us feel like this is a man. He's on leave from the British Navy right now. He gets a week or 8 days or something like that on leave, and he comes home. And then he has to go back to, this is World War II that's about to end. It's in the movie. They don't expect it's going to last much longer, but he's just on leave. And he meets this young woman as soon as she arrives there. And there are these interactions which happen, a lot of interactions that happen for various reasons that feel quite natural, quite complete. And you can just sort of feel that there's something happening here. It's very subtle at first. It's very human. I found myself, I don't spend a whole lot of time smiling. I watched some of this movie yesterday, and I just discovered I'm just smiling the whole time I'm looking at this thing. I can't remember any other movie that had me smiling. But there is this tension that's building here, that this beautiful woman that we don't approve of everything about her, but we think she's just as charming as can be. I mean, she is just a real nice human piece of work. I remember when the piece of work was used in praise, and she deserves that. And so does this guy. He's starting to have feelings about her, and she's starting to have feelings about him. And the result is she gets to be desperate to get to that other island. I mean, day after day, the weather does one thing or another that prevents, nobody's willing to take her across because they could get killed that way. And one of the ways they could get killed is that there's this second biggest, what's it called, whirlpool in the Europe, or I don't know if there really is one, but it eventually figures in this story. Trying to get across to the island would be very dangerous. And this young woman is so terrified of changing her plans. And understandably so. But she realizes, I got to get away from this guy that I'm falling for in order to complete my plan, which I need to do for whatever reasons you don't go into. But she's got to get out. I won't go further with the story. Let's just say that these two people go through a whole lot having to do with the fundamental choice that this lovely young woman has to make between two different men, two different sets of values, two different